This video is just going to go over how to complete your adding rational numbers hyperdoc. So when we are adding rational numbers, there are two more types that we need to know other than just integers, and that is adding positive and negative decimals and adding positive and negative fractions. So most of this is going to be reviewed from previous grade levels because you will be applying what you know about adding and subtracting decimals to adding and subtracting negative decimals. So you can first watch this video. If you click here, it will bring you to a YouTube video that briefly shows you and reminds you how to add and subtract decimals. And then you're going to use and apply what you know about this skill to what we have been learning in class this week. So first, on the left, you should see this example. And this goes through the steps for adding rational numbers. Okay. Yesterday we learned that if the rational numbers have the same sign, meaning if they're both negatives or if they're both positives, you're just going to add the value of the two numbers together and keep the sign. If the rational numbers have different signs, meaning you have one negative and one positive, you're going to subtract, or you're going to find the difference between the two numbers and keep the sign of the number with the greater absolute value, or keep the sign of the number that you have more of. So if you have more negatives, your answer is going to be negative. If you have more positives, your answer is going to be positive. But the key there is to find the difference, or to subtract the two numbers. Some things that are important to remember when adding and subtracting decimals are that you have to line up the decimal points, fill in any spaces with zeros, bring the decimal point straight down, and then add or subtract as usual. So here are two examples. The first example is 4 3/10 plus negative 9 2/10. So these have different signs. So I can look up at my notes, different signs. We are going to subtract or find the difference between these two numbers and keep the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. So step 1, subtract, and you use your regular procedure for subtracting decimals. When we subtracted, we got 4.9. So I need to go back to the numbers that I had. I had more negatives, right? We had 9 2/10 negatives. We only had 4 3/10 positives. Since I had more negatives, my answer is going to be negative. Example 2, we have negative 4 67 plus negative 2 5/10. So these have the same sign. These are both negatives. When we have the same sign, we will add the numbers together and keep the sign the same, right? We have 4.67 negatives and then 2.5 more negatives. We're going to add those together. Negatives plus negatives is just going to be more negatives. When we follow our rules for adding decimals, we get 7.17. And since they were both negative, our sum is going to be negative. So we would get negative 7 1700. Okay, so your job now is using the information you have here, what we learned yesterday, and your refresher on how to add and subtract decimals. You have 3 different types of problems. I would like you to get out a separate sheet of notebook paper and a pencil. You are going to solve each problem. After you solve each problem on notebook paper, take a photo of it and then save it to your Chromebook, and you'll be able to insert image, upload from your computer. You're going to upload each image into the box. Okay, so you should end up having 3 pictures, one in this box, one in this box, and one in this box. Try to make the pictures as clear as possible. Once you have your pictures pasted, you are going to put your final answer for each problem in the green box. Next, we can move on to adding positive and negative fractions. Again, you have a video for just a refresher on how to add and subtract fractions. Fix that should say fractions. Again, you're going to need that skill, and we're going to build upon it when we're talking about positive and negative fractions. Okay, so you're again going to use the same rule for adding integers, and we've talked about those before. But the only difference now is when adding and subtracting fractions. Remember, you must have a common denominator. You cannot add and subtract fractions that have different denominators. Okay, the denominator is the number on the bottom of the fraction. You're going to write equivalent fractions using a common denominator. Add or subtract the numerators. The denominator is going to stay the same, then write it in simplest form. So we have an example here with a mixed number. And then we have examples here with just regular fractions. I'm going to zoom in to explain these. Okay, so the first problem is negative 2.5 plus 10 and 1/4. These have different signs. We have a negative and a positive. Since they have different signs, we're going to subtract or find the difference between these two fractions and keep the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. So 10 and 1/4 minus 2.5. In order to get common denominators, we had to rewrite 2 and 1/2 to be 2 and 2/4. Okay, then we can just subtract. So you will subtract and you get 7 and 3/4. Because we have more positives than negatives, our final answer is 7 and 3/4. Okay, our next one, we have negative 7/8 plus negative 3/8. These both have the same sign. They're both negatives. So if they have the same sign, we're just going to add them and keep the sign, right? Because we got these negatives plus these negatives means we're just going to end up with more negatives. So 7/8 plus 3/8, that should actually say, yes, that's right, is 10/8. And then once you have that, you can simplify. The numerator and the denominator here can both be divided by 2. So we would simplify that to 5/4. And then 4 goes into 5 one whole time with 1 left over. We get 1 and 1/4. And just like we mentioned in the beginning, since they have the same sign, we're going to keep that negative sign. So the final answer is negative 1 and 1/4. So again, just like before, you have 3 different problems to work out here. You will work each one out on a piece of notebook paper. Take a picture of it, of your work shown, and paste it into the box given. Underneath that, you will type out your final answer. So you can use the backslash to write your fractions. So for example, let's say you wanted to do 4 and 3/4. You would just type it like that. 4 and 3/4. You actually don't even need that many spaces. Okay, so you'll put your final answers in there. Once you have that, you are done with your Google Doc, with your hyperdoc. You may hit turn in on Google Classroom. That way I know you are finished.